So I want to share with you a meaningful story of an experience in my life. I was 90 miles into a 100-mile race, and I'd been running all night. And it was the Pine to Palm 100-mile endurance run back in 2013, and it was a really tough race. I was exhausted. And when I pulled into the aid station around mile 90, I was feeling ready to quit. I was done. And the thing that gave me the inspiration to finish that race, despite an aggravated IT band and having lost pretty much all the skin on my heels, wasn't the aid station food. It wasn't fresh socks or even my crew, because they weren't allowed at that station. It was a 12-hour burrito I forgot was in my pocket. True story. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about what your customers actually want right now. So stick with me here. I'm not saying your customers necessarily want a burrito, unless you're Chipotle maybe. But here's the thing. That burrito wasn't supposed to matter that much, right? It was gross. It had been in my pocket for over a third of the race. But in that moment, right, it was everything. It satisfied something immediate that I was craving at that moment. And that small reward, that one bite, and I joke about this, but it's true, was what inspired me to keep going, right? And I've been starting to notice this in my life, my gravitation towards these small rewards and repeatable moments. And I didn't have really any language for that. It was just something I did that felt good and got me out of my head. And then I read this research from WGSN. They're a global trend forecasting firm. And they had a name for this. And they call it return on joy. And if you've heard of the term return on investment, right? This is ROJ, return on joy. And if you're building a small brand, especially in the outdoor health or wellness, I think understanding this idea might be an important thing to do right now. And because many people right now aren't necessarily investing in the big goals and transformations anymore. They're looking for the small things that make the effort feel worth it. And a lot of brands haven't really noticed. I first noticed this pattern in my kitchen, actually. As a solopreneur, I'm like in my head a lot. I live inside constant decision making. You might be able to relate to this. Every day feels like a tsunami of choices that they feel like they're important, right? Even when they're little decisions, they feel like they're important. What do I say yes to? What do I refine? What do I publish? What direction do I take this idea in? And even when I step away from my screen, right, my brain just comes with me, right? It doesn't stop solving. It doesn't stop looking for the next thing to figure out. But my brain loves to learn. And so I decided I wanted to master something completely unrelated to my work. I started making my own sourdough bread. Then I tried tortillas. Then I started making crackers. And I didn't do this because I didn't want to go to the grocery store, right? And it wasn't really about saving money, although I would consider myself pretty frugal. But there's something about working with dough, like the texture of it. And when I'm mixing and I'm kneading and I'm rolling it and I'm cutting, I'm not listening to the thoughts in my head about work. This is fun. Like, this is really satisfying and frankly, a relief. And it just feels good, right? And I realize this pattern shows up in other areas of my life too. So most mornings, I make my coffee by hand grinding my beans with a burr grinder, right? It actually limits me to 1 cup, which makes that 1 cup absolutely divine, right? And then I take it outside into my garden and I sit there wrapped in a warm blanket and I just listen to the sounds of nature. nature is actually very loud. It's very loud in the morning. The birds and the squirrels chattering and running around in the trees. I call it my tree TV. But what I've realized is that all of these things have something in common. They require me to pay attention with my body instead of being in my head. They're not cerebral, they're sensory. And that contrast between the cognitive overload of my work and the embodied presence of these physical rituals, that's what makes them feel so satisfying. And here's the thing. All day long in my business, the effort I put in is tied to outcomes that like live in the future, right? In the kitchen, I'm still putting in the effort, but the reward is immediate. Like it's tactile. It's the smell of bread. It's the feel of the soft, warm tortilla dough. The effort and the reward of those experiences live in the same moment. So WGSN says many people are experiencing what they call the Great Exhaustion. And I don't know if you remember the Great Resignation. This isn't that, right? People aren't quitting. It feels too risky right now to quit with the job market the way it is. But people are tired and they're asking themselves whether the effort they're putting in is actually giving them something back. And that question, what feels worth it right now, is what this whole shift is about. Because these small, repeatable moments are starting to carry more weight than big goals or big transformations right now. Think about that burrito. Here's where it gets interesting, because the big traditional markers of adulthood, like homeownership and starting a family, those bigger goals are feeling increasingly out of reach for a lot of people, especially younger people these days. These people are finding new reasons to celebrate. They're paying off a student loan. They're throwing a divorce party. They're having a sober anniversary. These aren't the milestones we were taught to chase, right? But they're the ones people are actually honoring right now. And for me, it's even smaller than that. It's not celebrating big alternative achievements even, but I want to master the art of making tortillas and celebrate that, right? I'm pretty determined to do that too. And my coffee in the garden, these aren't accomplishments in the traditional sense, but they feel like little wins to me. And honestly, part of this is kind of probably indulgence, and part of it is probably escapism, right? But there's something interesting underneath it. And in psychology, there's a concept called glimmers, which I find fascinating. These are those tiny, almost unremarkable moments that signal safety to your nervous system. And these aren't like peak experiences or huge breakthroughs, right? It's that cup of coffee that tastes amazing. Or it's that song that catches you off guard that you enjoy listening to. Or it's just the 10 minutes in the garden, right? Or a short hike down to the river. These little moments register in your body as joy. And I think this is what people are protecting right now. Not big goals, because a lot of those aren't attainable right now. Just moments where the effort and the return live in the same place. And here's why that matters for small brands. Because if that's where people are, if they're measuring emotional payoff more carefully now, if they're seeing or if they're seeking effort that gives them something back right now, then maybe the best products or services don't have to create those big transformations or even new rituals for people, right? They just need to fit seamlessly into the smaller glimmers that people already have. So sometimes it's fresh socks at mile 50, right? And sometimes it's a puffy jacket at mile 70, right? Sometimes it's a 12-hour burrito that you forgot was in your pocket at mile 90. And when you're in an overwhelming situation, those small things aren't small. They're everything. And I guess that's what I think people are experiencing right now. Life feels like running 100 miles. The goal feels too big, too far, and way too overwhelming for most of us. So people are breaking it into segments, right? They're protecting smaller moments within those segments. Not because they're giving up on the whole bigger picture or those big goals, but because those small moments are what make the bigger picture survivable. And your products or services already exist inside of those moments, most likely. Hiking gear, recovery tools, trail food, like a morning supplement, running shoes. You already know your product shows up in people's routines, but knowing that and talking about it are two different things. And a lot of brands in this space are still leading with the bigger transformations and the bigger outcomes. Become stronger, become healthier, become a better version of yourself, right? And I'm not saying that's wrong or that it won't sell, but right now, for a lot of people, those bigger transformations feel like standing at the start line of a 100-mile race. And it's just too much for them to take in. And there's a reason why this matters more right now than it did like 3 years ago, because the emotional weight of these small moments has shifted. Your customers are actively protecting them in a way they weren't before. And the way you talk about your products should reflect that shift. And the difference between we make great trail food and we're the moment at camp when you finally sit down and breathe. That's not about ingredients or weight specs, right? You're describing the emotional return of the experience. And that's what return on joy is really about, right? Less is becoming enough for a lot of people. They're being more intentional about where their energy goes. And if your brand can be part of those small moments, those glimmers, right? You're not just supporting people on their way to something bigger. You become part of the reward that they're protecting. And I don't know, I think that's where meaning is being made right now. So I'll just leave you with that and just ask you, what are the small moments that your customers are protecting? And how does your product or service show up inside them? So that's it. I just wanted to share those thoughts on where I'm seeing us right now in the larger global scheme of things and how that could apply to you. So please reach out if you have thoughts or ideas or opinions on what's going on right now and where we are, and maybe how your business is doing. Please reach out and let me know. I am so grateful that you guys are even here to talk to. So just, feel free to respond, leave a message. And if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to subscribe. I'm going to be making more of these. So anyway, thank you. Bye.